Welcome to part 2 of our interview with Dr. Andrew Deman, a comic scholar who's currently researching the life and work of comic writer Chris Claremont. In part 1, Andrew explained how Claremont and John Byrne's partnership ended because of Byrne's conservative beliefs. Now, there's a twist in the tale, as Byrne goes on to make queer comic book history.
The guy I mentioned who didn't like the sex stuff, John Byrne, he's the creator of the first canonically gay superhero. And that's really counterintuitive to a lot of people, but I find it kind of like beautiful in a weird way that even someone who's been regarded as being ultra conservative, some have said bigoted, that he flat out states, I created North Star because comics have to represent reality, and there are queer people in reality, and we needed to have gay superheroes. And he's very proud of that. And if you've read some of his other stuff that he's done, like again, he can be kind of bigoted in some ways. So the idea that even someone like that sees the point of representation is kind of buoying to me in a weird way.
North Star is a Marvel superhero who is a member of the team Alpha Flight. He was created in 1979, and on top of being the first comic book superhero to state, I am gay, he was also the first to have a same-sex marriage.
I mean, Marvel Comics, they love wedding issues. There's a lot of data to suggest that wedding issues don't sell well, actually, which I think is kind of funny, but they still love them. So like when Spider-Man got married to Mary Jane for the first time, that was huge. It was an event that everyone was kind of looking forward to and had a lot of focus on. So I think when we knew that North Star was going to get married, the big question we were asking is, will Marvel actually shine a spotlight on that? Or is this something that's going to happen off page entirely, or have like a 1-page brief dedication to it? But they pulled out all the stops. This isn't the marriage of two superheroes. North Star's husband is, I don't want to say just a dude, but he's kind of just a dude in the superhero universe, right? Like he's not a superhero. He's not a known quantity. He's a love interest. And that's something that is also kind of important in some counterintuitive ways. So for them to make this a double-page issue, for them to pursue media coverage that they pursued, and to again shine this spotlight on it, I think for a lot of people that was Marvel making right on something that they had kind of done wrong for a whole lot of years. And as I said, like their hands are a little bit tied with the comics code, but Marvel has put so much attention into things like the civil rights movement, some say appropriating, and that's a fair argument, but they've largely ignored the idea of queer sexuality except as subtext in their books. So for them to invest in this storyline the way that they invested in it, I think that was a kind of jubilant moment for a lot of comics fans who had struggled to reconcile their love for Marvel Comics with Marvel's historic treatment of queer sexuality.
In 2009, the Walt Disney Company bought Marvel Entertainment for $4 billion. Under new management, fans became worried for the future of their favorite characters, especially those who are queer.
When Disney made the Fox merger, they got this iconic, child-oriented queer sexuality storyline that everyone was ridiculously excited to see.
The story was Noelle Stevenson's Nimona, originally a graphic novel about the growing bond between an evil ex-knight and a teenage shapeshifter.
And a lot of people in the media were saying Disney's going to squash it. They're going to find a way to kill it. And the studio that was making Nimona was almost finished making Nimona. They recently went out of business with no advanced plans on whether or not they're going to allow this movie to see the light of day. And that could be a legitimate thing. We're in a pandemic. Disneyland is not drawing a ton of people right now. But a lot of people were concerned that this was reflective of Disney's stance on queer sexuality.
Disney's track record for including queer characters in their films isn't great.
Something that is reflected as well, when Endgame came out, Disney very proudly announced that there was going to be queer representation. And it was one guy in the background of a scene whose partner is dead and just talks about the fact that he had a husband, which was disappointing, I think, to a lot of people. So I think Marvel's commitment to queer sexuality emerges more before the Disney merger. And I think a lot of people are watching very carefully because they are concerned that the parent company is going to diminish some of the gains that Marvel has made.
Disney does have queer content on some of their acquired platforms, such as Love Victor on Hulu, and Everything's Gonna Be Okay on Freeform, but proper representation isn't black and white, and there are a lot of factors that go into doing it correctly.
So one of the things that can happen in these early things, including with some of the North Star stories, is that a character can be overdetermined by their sexuality. And this is just like tokenism, right? The character becomes the gay character, and that's all they are. They're defined exclusively by their sexuality. Every storyline is about their sexuality in a roundabout way. It's, I don't know, disheartening at this point in our media history that that's still going on, but it's still going on.
The other concern with queer representation is ghettoization. In this case, that can be isolating all the queer characters into one singular project instead of including different sexualities in all projects.
What they'll do is they'll pander to a niche audience, and they'll have like one book, and like all the characters are queer in that book, and they get to point at that book and say, look, we have queer representation, but there's still no queer characters showing up in Captain America and Iron Man and all these other books. So they've just taken all of their like queer representation and they've pushed it into one corner. A lot of people are huge fans of Kieran Gillen's Young Avengers, as I am. It's a remarkable book. But it contains a lot of Marvel's discussions of queer sexuality only in that book. So it's in some ways empowering Marvel to not make the changes that they probably need to make. But we do know that the Marvel cinematic/TV universe is pushing towards a Young Avengers storyline. And I think a lot of us in the comic studies field are looking hard at that to see if they're going to do what's called symbolic annihilation. And make all these queer characters, aggressively heterosexual or just not talking about their sexuality, or if they're going to sort of honor the actual backstories of these characters. So the short answer is we're going to find out real soon. And a lot of us are kind of scared because Disney, but I don't know, there's room to be hopeful as well, I think.
Northstar was the first out gay superhero in the Marvel Universe, but there are numerous characters in the comic book universe before and after Northstar who were queer-coded, meaning the writers left hints to their sexuality within their characters' actions and personality.
What you'll find is that most Marvel superheroes at some point in their existence have been queer-coded, including the big ones. Captain America and his relationship to Bucky Barnes, just as many people ship that in the cinematic universe. That's been there in comics for a good long time. Batman and Robin for a good long time. Wonder Woman and a number of Amazons. Wonder Woman was almost kind of in DC Comics in the 1970s in the George Perez run. I identified as queer, which is, ridiculously obvious. They all live on an island where there's literally no men. It's just all women. And for the longest time, the creators were like pretending that there was no sex stuff, which is strange, especially if you know the creator of Wonder Woman, who was very much queer coding Wonder Woman from the outset.
Despite the long list of subtle queer characters, there are two comic book characters who are out and proud bisexuals.
And that would be Deadpool at Marvel. They've only hinted at that in the movies. Okay, maybe they've more than hinted at that in the movies, I should be fair. It's much more obvious in the comics. And then Harley Quinn at DC Comics. Again, these are not side characters. These are not token characters. These are flagship characters. So to have them embrace a queer sexuality is, again, a sign of clear progress on a massive, mainstream multimedia level.
Harley Quinn is known for having a toxic relationship with the DC supervillain, the Joker, but she has another romantic relationship with Poison Ivy. Deadpool's queer themes can be a little more difficult to spot.
Like if you read Rob Liefeld's, and Rob Liefeld is a creator who's constantly under fire in comics. His original creation of Deadpool is just Deathstroke, a famous character from DC Comics. So much so that they literally named him Wade Wilson, which is a joke because Slade Wilson is the name of Deathstroke. He's just a badass ninja guy, sexuality not really discussed, other than he has a girlfriend that he's very abusive towards. Sometimes the Deadpool creators don't mention that part. And over the years, Deadpool gets a little bit more slapstick. He gets more fourth wall breaking. And part of that includes incorporating same-sex attraction a number of times to certain characters and just certain off-the-cuff references to finding male characters attractive. And that's more or less it. They haven't done a lot with it in terms of exploring really a strong Deadpool romance, in my opinion, with the same-sex attraction at the heart of it. But it's clearly woven into Deadpool's character. If you're a Deadpool fan, you know that he is very fluid in his sexuality, in contrast to most superheroes, who, of course, are defined as part of their sort of very heteronormative exterior.
Deadpool is played by Ryan Reynolds in the recent film adaptation, but will Disney take the leap and incorporate more queer storylines into the films?
I think that is a massive question. Again, it's one of those things that we're all watching, because the first 2 Deadpool movies were made under Fox. The third one is made under Disney. What is that going to mean? I mean, people were terrified even like a PG-13 Deadpool movie was going to come out at Disney. Not the case. It looks like we're going R-rated. But will queer sexuality be represented in Deadpool to a greater degree following a natural trajectory from the first 2 films? Or will they tamp that down out of concern for their shareholders? I don't know. I'm really interested to find out. But I do think what you're saying about how individual creators achieving power and advocating for queer representation, I think that has historically been as enormous as an audience advocating for queer representation. So that's definitely something that I could see happening.
It could happen, but it depends on these big companies to not back down even when they're getting pushback from some fans.
I think I am looking for them to continue to build on the trajectory that they've established and to, again, not step backwards. Marvel has been in the press a lot for getting flack from public about anytime they try to be progressive in the representation. Like, people getting super mad about like Thor being a woman. No one complained about Beta Ray Bill, who is the other Thor. But as soon as it's Jane, everybody's freaking out and saying that this is, BS politics and stuff like that. No, it was great storytelling, clearly. So I'd like to see that. I would like to see more queer representation in Marvel Comics with characters who are not defined exclusively by their sexuality. And I would like to see those characters peppered throughout the Marvel universe, not just cornered in one area that they sort of designate or delegate as the queer corner of the comics.
I love this next part. I asked Andrew if he knew any comic plots off the top of his head that just screamed queer.
I'm going to go back to North Star because I really love a story in X-Men versus Alpha Flight. So like it's a B story. It's not the main story. What happens is the X-Man Rogue, who has been identified as queer-coded by some other scholars, by the way, which is a little odd because she's famously in a relationship with the male X-Man Gambit. But anyway, Rogue absorbs North Star's powers in a fight, and when she absorbs his powers, she gets his memories. At this time, North Star is very closeted. So after that, you have this story of Rogue knowing North Star's secret and the emotional weight that carries for him, and having to interact with him and his teammates who are, for lack of a better term, dicks to him about his sexuality. And having her show this somewhat misguided sense of like sympathy and appreciation for something that she seems like she really hasn't considered. That's huge. And the other one that stands out for me is it's like a 2-page sequence in Uncanny X-Men 200 and something from the 1990s. It's one of the first issues to feature Gambit, in which you have Mystique and Destiny. Mystique is one of the most famous X-Men now. She's the blue shapeshifter played by Jennifer Lawrence in the films. In Claremont's writing, she has been married to a woman since the 1900s. And he can't say that, but it's ridiculously clear. Like, they're having coffee in the morning after waking up. Like, you get it. And Destiny dies, and Mystique grieves horribly. And there's this just stunningly beautiful scene of Mystique staring at her photo of them when they were both young women. And Mystique is in the shape of a man at this point. And she uses her shape-shifting powers to like change her face to look like Destiny when she was young, to look like Destiny when she was old, and then to cry over the photo. And it's just a beautiful moment that speaks to the depth of that emotional relationship that, again, Claremont couldn't canonically speak to. I really love that.
I couldn't leave my conversation with Andrew without asking him a few speed round superhero questions, starting with, what powers would he have?
I really like telekinesis. And I think that's probably just me being like a weak-bodied academic. The idea of like moving things with my mind. That sounds delightful to me. Yeah, I think
when you say moving things with your mind, you mean like, some Jean Grey X-Men Evolution, like moving a paperclip, or like the semi?
I think I would dabble in the like really shady Chris Angel parlor tricks and like, look at me moving this paperclip, and get a massive kick out of that. But no, I would also love to bust down walls and stuff like that with it. That'd be cool.
So like violent telekinesis too.
If you're going to have the power, you should have the power, right?
Okay, what would your superhero name be?
Oh my God. I'm an English major. I should have this ready to go. Okay. I wouldn't actually use this, but my name is J. Andrew Deman. So the way that my university abbreviates emails, my name is actually Jade Man on emails, and all my students point out that that's the worst superhero name ever. A superhero.
Because I do feel like you would need to be like adorned in jade.
I know. Like, what do you do with jade? What are the unique properties of jade other than it's kind of a gaudy color? Nothing goes with it.
I also wanted to ask, is there anywhere that you'd like our audience to connect with you? Whether that's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook? We
do have a website. It's called ClaremontRun.com. But more usefully, I think you can find me on Twitter at ClaremontRun. And just day to day, we're talking about this author who did amazing things with subversive representations of queer sexuality, which is the focus of a lot of our daily postings.
Thanks for watching. Pride is a production of Straw Hut Media. If you like the show, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Pride, and then tune in weekly for new episodes. If you don't mind, please share this episode with your friends, and then subscribe to our podcast. And when you're done with that, you can follow me at Levi Chambers. Pride is produced by me, Levi Chambers, Maggie Bowles, Ryan Tillotson, and Caitlin McDaniel. It's edited by Sebastian Alcala and Daniel Ferreira. Sound designed and mixed by Sebastian Alcala. Even like Magneto, you're like, oh, I can control metal, right?
I know, yeah.
But you would be like, I can control jade.
Yeah, I would
not
have
a lot of it in nature, so it's environmentally specific.
I would live very close to the largest jade mine, and that's my wheelhouse.
Straw Hut Media.